everybody, and welcome to Voices of West Windsor, a project in which we aim to bring the more marginalized voices of West Windsor's history forward. Today we have with us Akshay Tiwari, who is a huge member in bringing music and the world's music right to West Windsor. So, hi Akshay, how are you doing?
Hello, I'm well. How are you?
I'm good. Let's get started, I guess. Um, what does West Windsor mean to you?
So, something about West Windsor is I used to actually live in a completely different town before second grade, and I moved into Plainsboro in second, and then in West Windsor even later in middle school. So, really, I got to get the sort of outsider's perspective on the town because I hadn't lived here all my life. And what I've noticed is this is, of anywhere I've lived, this is probably the most open and welcoming town because there's so much diversity, there's so many opportunities. People are always willing to, join in any creative effort you start, which is something that's really great about our school district.
Yeah, definitely. I come from the same way. I didn't live here all my life. We actually lived in the same community for a couple years. So I completely agree. West Windsor is such an open and incredible town. And on that same note, what makes West Windsor unique?
Um, well, I think one of the things that makes West Windsor unique is, and this is something that a lot of people like to make fun of at times, but the open space to it. Um, and the reason I say some people make fun of it sometimes is people will say, "Oh, it's some hick Farmville town," but to me, I find much of my inspiration from nature, and this sort of atmosphere, it's it's at the same time suburban and convenient in that sense, but also very it's you, there's very quick access to nature and different trails and the Mercer County Lake, which is one of my favorite places in the state.
Yeah, 100%. That's not something that people normally talk about when they talk about what makes West Windsor unique. But in the perspective of music, you're completely right. It's such an inspiration. And where do you see yourself in the community of West Windsor?
I see myself amongst all the other people pushing to move art forward because it's not just me either. When I go to school, we have a music department, an entire wing dedicated to that, and uh, obviously before the virus, especially, whenever you enter that wing, there's usually something going on, someone trying to gather a group together or create a project or something that can be remembered even after they leave school. And I think that's really special. I've seen it in the choirs, in within my own orchestra with the bands, and there's just so many opportunities to get involved in music and not only see the real world of music as a student, but also be able to see how you can make a difference. Because music is not a concrete thing either. It's changed over the ages and it will continue to change. And I like to believe that we're the ones who will be responsible for that.
That's really great. And what would you say to someone, maybe a middle schooler aiming to be in the same position you are now?
Aiming to study music, I'd say, well, one of the greatest handicaps for young musicians is a lack of self-confidence, and this is caused by just the tremendous amount of effort to get the sound that you would like, and even then, there's always more to improve. I mean, in the words of Joshua Heifetz, one of the best violinists of all time, I believe he said something along the lines of, there's never a way to reach a goal. There's always more to be achieved. And in the beginning stages, this can be quite disconcerting because we like to think that we set a goal, we reach the goal, that goal is finished. And yet, that's not how art works. So, to a young musician or someone who would like to study music, I want to say, you know, the more you put into an art form, not just music, any art form, the more you will get out of it, and that's what makes it so rewarding. And it, the goal of music isn't necessarily to reach perfection. It never was. Um, and as such, I'd say don't make your goal to reach perfection. Make your goal instead to advance music and to understand it in your own right.
Mm-hmm. That is, honestly, that's something that I wish someone said to me when I started my music career. And what's a word that comes to mind when you think of West Windsor?
When I think of West Windsor, honestly, you know, beautiful or serene. Because as I said, the nature in this town is probably my favorite thing about it, aside from, of course, the people that make it up.
And where do you see West Windsor in 30 years? And where do you want to see West Windsor in 30 years?
Well, I'd say West Windsor would probably continue along the trend of attracting more and more people seeking a higher quality education and just this amazing lifestyle that's offered here. And what I would like to see is um, I would like to see more attention given to the arts because even though we're full of passionate people who create our arts department, it's not necessarily the most supported thing. It's not really the first thing that comes to mind, even though we're so good at it. So I want to see a more, I would like to see a more open support and more open playground for young musicians and young artists, people pursuing these careers. And something else I would like to see that we don't really talk about much is going on the theme of nature. I would like to make sure that in the next 30 years, we preserve that part of the town rather than, succumb to mass urbanization or suburban sprawl. Because if you know anything about suburban sprawl, it has been proven time and again to be extremely wasteful. And we, while we are a suburb, I don't think we've reached that sort of level yet, and I hope that we do not.
Yeah, I agree. And how do you think, along those same lines, how do you think West Windsor can improve?
Um, well, about West Windsor improving, well, just to start, to lay the groundwork, I'd say this town is pretty far up. Like, there's not a very long way to go here. Um, However, as I said before, a more open support for the arts. Um, and to give an example, whenever there's a massive arts event in our schools, one of the biggest examples is the musical. And the musical is a huge success every year, but the cost of that success is paid for and generated, and the revenues generated by the musicians themselves or the people involved. People pay from their own pocket for props, or they create their own endeavors to get money rather than being supplied directly by the school. And that's a result of having a generally sort of low budget for the arts compared to, other things you could do in the school. Despite. So I think something to improve is to have a more even distribution of the budget amongst STEM and the arts because they are really both things that must exist together. There's no science without art or art without science.
Um, and is there someone in this town who has inspired you to do the things that you've done today?
Well, the first person I can think of is most definitely my orchestra teacher, Mr. Utley, and he's actually new to teaching at High School North relatively. He came in during my freshman year, and as the sort of the co-teacher to Mr. Ants, who has recently retired, and ever since then, he has always been probably the most supportive figure in my life when it comes to music, and has always pushed me to learn more about music, internalize it more, see it from different perspectives. And that has pretty much put me on the trajectory that led me here.
And do you have plans to study music in the future?
Yes, I actually do. I would like to study the art of composition.
Wow, that's incredible. So what have you composed so far and for like what instrumentation?
Yeah, so I've composed and arranged quite a few pieces. Originally, actually, it started with arrangements of world folk music. So really, that was what started my music writing to a greater degree. Because what happened is I actually had started exploring new types of music, and I really wanted to do something with these types of music because I realized they're not very well known here. Usually when we think of, traditional music, we can't really come up with much that lies outside of Europe. Or we can come up with something that's overly generalized, and that's not good, of course. So really, I started arranging these pieces um, to bring them to a larger crowd, to bring them to the light. And eventually, after arranging enough pieces, I started composing pieces in those styles that I had studied. And that just kept going onwards until I began to compose. So, to answer your original question, whether about how I composed and instrumentation, originally it was just for a string quintet because the original ensemble that I created to perform these pieces was a string group. Eventually, I started adding some instruments that people were able to play. So, for example, if I had, let's say I had two cellists, and one of them was able to play the guitar, and I wanted to play Spanish music, what I would do is I would tell one of the cellists to play the guitar, transfer them there, and then we have this sort of enhanced instrumentation. And from then on, I got more involved in listening to, a lot of the classical music that, from the Romantic period especially, and more recently from the 20th century, which is when music really started to be pushed to the bounds. And because of that, recently I've been composing some symphonic works.
And that is actually a perfect segue into our next couple questions. You talked about your the folk music, and that's actually exactly why we have brought you here because of your ensemble, Colors of Culture. So, could you talk a little bit about Colors of Culture?
Yes, of course. College culture was something I created in, I think it was sophomore year. And the funny thing is, originally, it wasn't actually intended to be something that would last. I thought it would just be one concert and that's it. But that concert was actually a pretty big success. A lot of people enjoyed it, and many of my musicians came to me and said, this is a good idea. We should continue this. And of course, I agreed. It was a fun process for all of us, and so we continued. And what we do is, as I described earlier, is we bring folk music, to the forefront of West Windsor's audience and Plainsboro, and it's I believe we can count both as entertainment, as music always is part of entertainment, but also as a sort of education, a form of education. Because something I like to make sure of in each performance we do is to properly introduce the context behind the pieces we're performing, where it's from. And what I hope to do is what happened to me when I first started listening to folk music. That someone in the audience could listen to something and they really liked it, and they recalled the culture it came from, and they do their own research and are open to an entirely new world of music they didn't know existed before.
Yeah. And what do you think about music's capacity to express cultures?
I think music has an immense ability to express culture, and you'd be surprised even the values within a culture. For example, in many cultures in Eastern Europe, where the coming of spring is very important to the culture because of they have harsh winters, and then the spring comes and they can finally start harvesting new foods. And you can actually hear it in their music. They have very specific styles of music dedicated to the spring festivals and the harvest, and and rhythms that indicate the actions of harvesting or of dancing. And speaking of dancing, that's another thing. Dancing is also a huge indicator of culture. And of course, dancing and music go hand in hand, and certain types of music are associated with certain types of dance. That being said, one major example is in Poland, there is a very distinctly Polish type of dance called the mazurka. And if you know about Polish history, much of their history was spent ruled by foreign foreign entities, whether that be Prussia or Imperial Russia. And what actually happened is some of these mazurkas, they became a symbol of national pride for the Poles, and actually some of these oppressive governments would outlaw mazurkas or playing pieces by Polish composers who made mazurkas. And that's just an example of how a type of music or a style can become infused with a cultural identity.
And now talking a little bit apart from music in general, you lead Colors of Culture with students from your own school, right? Um, so what effects do you see music having on students such as yourself and your fellow members of Colors of Culture?
Well, something that's not just in the Colors of Culture Orchestra, but in the entire orchestra that I've noticed, and I'm sure it's probably true for the band and the chorus as well, or the choir as well, is it when you are playing in an ensemble with other musicians, there's this connection between you because the thing about ensemble playing is it requires you to all immerse yourself in the music and be connected by that idea. And because of that, it can lead to musicians who play together, becoming almost like a little family because we all share that bond. We all understand what music means. And it's just it's for me at least, it's really helped me grow socially as well. I used to be very shy in middle school, and um, you know, being part of the orchestra has helped me open up my more, creative side, of course, which is something I used to hide. And in that sense, I think music and art in general is just amazing things for, being able to convert your ideas to something tangible.
And is West Windsor, like the West Windsor Plainsboro School District, handling music well? And if not, how can it improve?
I think the students and the staff behind music education are doing a very good job in West Windsor and Plainsboro. We've consistently been among the top ranking schools. Um, Really, it's just as I said before, some of the budget issues, the distribution of it, especially between different fields. But besides that, I think we're doing a pretty good job.
And from a student's perspective, can you tell about your opinions or experiences about how the school system has handled the coronavirus?
I think the school district has done really the best it can. Um, Even though there have been some incidents where people have tested positive, I don't think we've never had any major outbreak within the school yet. And I think that is partly, well, not just partially, it's almost entirely because of the efforts they've put in to make sure that everything is, sanitized. When you're sitting in class, you'll see janitors come by and wipe down all the door handles. And just all these little efforts, they add up and really provide a sense of safety to our learning environment, which is very important because, for some people, the hybrid versus virtual thing isn't really much of an option. I mean, while for me it's not extremely urgent, one thing I've noticed is when I'm at home, sometimes my connection is quite terrible and I cannot speak actually at all, which really impedes on my learning experience. So I think the school has done a very good job at providing the students a sense of safety and creating a system that actually works.
And how has the coronavirus affected musical endeavors in the school?
Well, within school, as I said before, one of the main things about music is ensemble playing, which obviously can't happen. Now, for the orchestra, we're a little bit lucky because um, you can play with a mask on, and it doesn't use, you know, breathing or any. It does use breathing, but nothing to the extent of, for example, the band, which actually cannot play at all at the moment. Um, so really what coronavirus has done is it's made it, well, obviously we cannot perform, for one. And rehearsals are also quite stilted because, half the people are at home, half are in school, and it just doesn't really work well. But what we've been doing is rather than, sit around and mope or just study music theory for an hour every day, what we decided to do is play quartets. And the way we do this is there's a certain website called BandLab, which allows you to record your part in a quartet, and other people can record their own. So, for those of you watching this who need to know, what I mean by a part, basically the way that a lot of the ensemble music works, whether that be choir, orchestra, or band, is each instrument or each voice is actually playing a different notes with different rhythms, and when they come together, that's what creates the music as a whole. So what BandLab does is allows you to play your own part in a recording, and people can record their own parts over that. And while it's not a perfect system, it has a lot of glitches. I won't lie to you. It works, and it's the best we can do for now.
Yeah. So thank you, Akshay, so much for this insight into school, and thank you for your work that you've done bring the world's music to West Windsor. And like you said, music has such a impact on cultures, on spreading it. So thank you for joining us for Voices of West Windsor, and we will see the rest of you next week.
Thank you for having me.